Hello, everyone, and welcome back to me, but not the death of death. Welcome back to Everything Else with Nick Stewart. I just can't thank you guys enough for waiting patiently for the return of the show, and for those of you patron supporters who are still supporting me through this time, thanks again. It's a pleasure to be back with you guys. And I think you're going to like where the show goes from here. So I got a beer, I got cameras rolling, got a new studio. It's Saturday night. Let's do this. For anyone who cares, for anyone who doesn't know, the show has been offline since July or August. Started a new job and we moved into a house and stuff. So just stuff going on. It was a busy time, so there was just no way I could have been doing the show. But now I'm back, and this should be a regular thing. I've been trying for months now to get back into it, and I think now I'm finally ready to do it. So what I wanted to talk about today is the fact that the empire we live under is crumbling, because I think that should be of interest to everyone. But, before that, just wanted to again thank everyone and just point out that we got a new studio, black room with big bookcases, and this is exactly what I wanted the show to always look like. And now I've achieved that dream. So we're in a good spot. I hope you guys enjoy where things go from here. So I've been, obviously I talked about this a lot ad nauseum before the show's hiatus, that things are very clearly not okay. I think anyone, no matter what side politically or, religiously or anything you fall under, I think it's pretty obvious that things are not okay. And things everywhere around us seem to be crumbling. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. And I've been reading a lot more about the concept of empires falling and just the nature of history and how things tend to play out in kind of cycles. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But sorry, my script says pause for a sip of beer and get some stuck in your mustache, so that's what I did. I do everything that's in the script. No, just kidding. I think everyone who listens knows that this is unscripted, or at least has been for a while. Case in point, I just said exactly like an unscripted person would. So I think everywhere you look, nobody trusts the government. That's pretty obvious. Election years are this year that we have every 4 years, where half the people vote in their person and make the other half of the country miserable, and we just kind of keep doing it back and forth. And so there might be half of the government you don't trust, there might be half that you love or you think should be in charge of things, but no matter what the case is, roughly nobody trusts big institutions. Nobody trusts the government entirely. Everyone has the sense that we are kind of ants under a magnifying glass, at least for the last 2 years. And I think this realization is a healthy and inevitable thing, that every empire, country, nation, whatever you want to call it, every thing like that is going to go through this at some point or another. And I want to just bring attention. This is something I've literally wanted to talk on the show. I wanted to talk about this on the show since I went on hiatus. And it's just so funny to me. There were at least 2 examples that I remember off the top of my head, but it happens every couple of days. A music venue or something in that realm will post their new COVID guidelines for coming to the venue. And the one that I remember specifically, because I commented on it and got into a 3-day argument with someone, was the Glass House in Pomona commented that I believe only vaccinated people were going to be able to go and you had to wear a mask and all this crazy stuff. Every single comment at least for the first day that I was checking, I mean, it was just 20-1 people saying like, well, I guess I'll just watch online. Like, I'm never going here again. Like, screw you guys, And it's funny that I got into such a confrontation because my only comment was, hey, Glasshouse, this post is not going super well for you. and that was, that simple observation was enough to really peeve people off at me and get into a whole thing. But that is a better indicator of like where we're going as a country to me than like what Fox News or CNN is going to tell you at 6 o'clock every night. To me, YouTube comments are where society really lives, and comments on things like that. How have we left Afghanistan during the hiatus from the show? Like the greatest thing to happen in the last like 10 years, and I missed it because I was on hiatus. So I've really wanted to talk about that. And there's a lot to say about that, but one thing that's just should be obvious is just how revealing that whole ordeal was. What great lengths the news went to vilify Joe Biden for pulling our troops out of Afghanistan, like something we all would have been proud of and glad about, 20 years ago, is now the worst thing that a president's ever done. It's just amazing how he was just this darling to the whole country until he did that. And that should tell you a little something about where the interests of the media lie. But what's way more interesting to me is the fact that everyone kind of saw through it. Like, some people took a lot of the stories seriously and took like, it's like Michael Malice says that the news can say things that are factual even if they're not true. And so it's like, yes, it's a fact that the Taliban took over as soon as we left Afghanistan. But is that the true, like, are you presenting that in a true way? Is it the fact that we pulled out and this evil Taliban moved in immediately and took over everything we did for the last 20 years? Or is the truth that that's exactly what was always going to happen? There was no way, from my understanding of it, the Taliban is what the people support because that's their brothers and nephews and uncles that fight in the Taliban. The army that we created, they've got a problem with the pedophilia and, killing civilians and stuff. So it's like the army we created in Afghanistan is maybe not the best thing and not what the citizens would really prefer. And as evil as the Taliban is, and I believe that, as evil as they are, maybe that's not the worst possible case scenario, and maybe that's really what the people would prefer over an invading country like America or the army we created over there, whatever. But just that wasn't even the point of what I was trying to say. But the idea that, Joe Biden would be vilified for this is just very revealing. And, the number one thing that I heard about Trump when he left office was like, well, at least he didn't get us into any more wars. Like, that was the compliment that people gave Donald Trump. And it's like, so I think America in general doesn't want to be in these wars. I think that we would all like it if we left the wars. And yet, if you look at the news, leaving a war is one of the worst things we've ever done. And, we hurt people by leaving a war. Like, imagine that. Like, we hurt people by not invading their country anymore. That's weird, right? Like, so there's just so many revealing things like that going on. And I think, see, I want to post this a lot of places like Facebook, so I'm going to be very cautious about how I say this. The needle, I think everyone could be on the same page if I said the needle. The fact that this is being forced on employees and all these people, like, if you want to go to a concert, you got to have this thing. All the different ways it's being forced. It's very clearly not what the majority of people want, because the majority of people have not gotten it. And that speaks a lot louder than anything the news is going to tell you about it, So I and then you also have to take into account out of the minority of people who have gotten it, how many were forced? Because it's like pretty much, yeah, probably half the people I know who got it were forced by their employers. So that's something to think about. So like, do the majority of people buy into the idea that this is the worst thing that's ever happened to mankind, and we have a free cure, and all you have to do is sign up to take it? And we still can't get the majority of people to do that. So we just live in an interesting time where you can't really hide anything with the internet. You can't really pretend that things are, 20 years ago, you could pretend that things were the way Fox News told you they were, or the way that CNN told you. And it's just not that way anymore. So I think it's a lot more obvious how little people trust institutions now. And so I'm reading this book that is amazing, and, take it with a grain of salt, just like anything else you would read. But it's called The Fourth Turning, and it's basically these two historians analyzed a lot of history, going back to ancient history all the way to, very recent history. It was written in the 90s, but it predicted a lot of things very, very well. And it's called The Fourth Turning, and it's basically this concept that there's four turnings that every life cycle is going to go through. Every civilization is going to kind of go through, and the fourth one is the crisis period, and then it turns over into a new paradigm shift. And so the last fourth turning was World War II. The one before that was the Civil War, and then the Revolution. That's just American history, but every society has these four turnings that they go through. And without belaboring, what they are and how they work and everything, because I don't even really fully understand that yet, suffice it to say that roughly 2008 to 2028 is the fourth turning of our civilization. And so, it's about 20 years. It's not a hard 20 years, but it's generally about a 20-year cycle, maybe 25. And so sometime between now and like 2030, there's going to be this massive paradigm shift that, that brings us into the first turning of the whole next cycle. And how these turnings usually work, the crisis period is usually when everyone bands together against a threat and defeats it. And so in World War II, it was the Nazis and the Axis powers, and and you can look at every crisis period and you can point to a villain. You can say the people got together and they defeated that villain. And so what I'm wondering about now is, like, who would you point to as the villain of this crisis period that we're living in? I'll give you a minute. I'm sure a lot of people would say the unvaccinated. I think a lot of people would maybe say China, like, who knows? But I'm going to put my money on the federal government. I'm going to put my money on, that's the thing that most people don't trust. That's the thing that at any given time, half the people don't like because their team member isn't in charge of it anymore. That is the thing that is wreaking the most havoc on our society today. So I'm gonna bet money that the federal government becomes that villain that we all band together to defeat in the next 8 to 10 years. I think 2008 is obviously when this crisis period started, because that's when the recession happened. And I think that was a clear moment in history, in like recent history, that I remember, where people stopped loving their country and started questioning everything, questioning the banks, questioning the Fed, questioning, the military. I mean, 2008, we elected a person who claimed they were going to end the wars. So, what message does that send? Like, well, people wanted someone who wasn't going to, overextend us militarily, So, and then from 2008 to roughly 2028, that's supposed to be the length of this supposed crisis period. And so that's when it's supposed to end. So, it certainly seems like we're in a crisis period, doesn't it? Like, we live in a different country now than we did in 2019 or even February 2020. People talk about February 2020, and it's hard to believe that it was almost 2 years ago already, but people talk about that time the way that we talk about August of 2001. what was different about August of 2001? Well, the trade centers were standing, and we weren't afraid of terrorists, and we weren't at war yet. And we were doing acts of war, but we weren't in an active war yet. And so, people look back at August 2001 and look at video of people, out in public, and just look at them and think like, you have no idea how much your world is about to change. And we look back on like real estate in 2007 the same way, like, oh, you guys have no idea what's coming. And we look back on concerts in February 2020 and just think like, man, take it from the future. You guys have no idea what's about to hit you. And I think that's enough of a gauge to say like, we live in a different, like, history has changed. We are in a different paradigm than we were prior to March of 2020. And Jeff Deist said this, and a lot of people have been repeating it because it's a really good point. The first day of the American Revolution, or the first day of the French Revolution, or whatever, so take some big event. Nobody looked at that day and said, you know what? Hey, Sabbath, I have a guest on the show. This is Sabbath the cat. Nobody looked at the first day of the French Revolution and said like, hey, the French Revolution started today. Hey, buzz off. Nobody said the French Revolution started today. Nobody said the American Revolution started today. Like, we look back on that time and we say that's when something started and it played out for this many years or whatever. And I think it's obvious what Jeff Deist's point was. I think it's obvious that in March of 2020, something started, and we don't have a frame of reference yet to call it a revolution or to call it a change or a crisis or whatever, but it's very obvious something has begun, and we're still playing it out now, and for the foreseeable future, we will be playing it out. And I think maybe in 20 years, we'll be able to look back at this and say like, oh yeah, that's how it started, where, the federal government was overturned or whatever. And we went back to being 50 countries or whatever's going to happen. I'm not saying it's going to be a good change, but something is going to change drastically because no empire has ever survived what we've done to ourselves on an economic level, on a military level, on a government level. Nothing has ever survived what we've done. And so we're definitely headed for something, and it's some kind of collapse of the empire. I don't know if that means we'll be non-existent. I certainly hope not, and I think there's reason for that hope. But I think it's obvious that something is coming. I think in 10 years, everything's going to be different, and we'll look back at this time as like, man, that sucked, and things are pretty good now. Let's hope. When Biden came out and talked about what he wanted businesses to do, I think that's clear enough. Businesses of 100 or more. Get me? You get it. When he came out and said that, how many governors, my governor here in Oklahoma included, came out and said, yeah, we're not doing that. Does that alarm anybody that there are governors, like multiple governors, standing up to the president and saying, we're not going to go along with this thing that you're saying? Like, does that sound like the start of a civil war to you? Because that's kind of what it sounds like to me. And like, I've said it many times on the show, I don't think a civil war is what we want. I have a lot of conservative friends who think that's what they want. And it is not. 620,000 people died in the last Civil War, and way more than that would die today if it happened again. So it's not what you want, but that's certainly how it starts. 5, 10, I don't even know how many, South Dakota, Florida, Oklahoma, all those guys and gals said, well, we're not doing it. And that's exactly how these types of, that's the exact kind of benign thing that starts a civil war. Whatever the case may be, even if the fourth turning is just a load of garbage, because, I haven't lived it yet, so I can't really say for sure this is what it's going to be. Like, they're coming at history from a very cyclical point of view. And as a Christian, my view of time is a little more linear, although I think there are cycles that go linearly, if that makes sense. I think it's a little bit of both, but It's entirely possible that we're living through something that's never happened before and may never happen again. It's entirely possible that societies and empires have had this sort of thing happen before, and that it's coming from a very rehearsed place in history. But whatever the case may be, it's not going to stay this way. Like, whatever this is that we're doing, like half pandemic, half not, weird weird thing, it's not going to be staying this way. I think it's clear, as I said before, from Instagram comments and the fact that the free cure to the worst thing to ever happen to humanity nobody wants. I think that's clear enough that we are not headed in the direction that the federal government and the media wants us to go. And so that's something. That's how paradigms are shifted. So what I really want to talk about, I shouldn't say that. I really wanted to talk about everything I just talked about for 20 minutes. But the bow I wanted to tie on this is that a lot of I'm a postmillennialist. What does that mean? It means too much to really put it into words here, but there's a few different views of the future in Christianity, and I hold the most historical view of the future that's been held by the church for 2,000 years, and that is that the kingdom of God has come and that things are progressing in a positive way, that the world is being progressively Christianized as we go on. And I think if you just look at the rates of how many Christians are in the world, that's clearly been on the upswing ever since the church was founded, and it will continue to be that way. But that doesn't mean that bad things don't happen. So when I talk about postmillennialism, I kind of sound like a different person than when I'm talking about politics, because I come across pretty pessimistic about political things. And, I'm talking about the empire falling on today's episode. So, it's pretty obvious that I have a somewhat pessimistic view of the immediate future. But I've also said on the show before, I don't think America falling would necessarily be the worst thing to ever happen to the world. I think it'd be the worst thing to happen to the American government. It'd be the worst thing to happen to, some Americans who are swept up in the wrong thing and are harmed by it. But for America, as a whole, for the world, I don't think that is the worst thing. I think even on a military level, America ceasing to exist would improve the circumstances abroad so much. You think Yemen might improve a little bit for us being taken out of the picture? You think Iraq might be a little better off without America existing? Probably, right? So it doesn't mean I want it to happen, but if we look at what we're going through right now is the end of the empire, which from a historical, economic, logical point of view, cultural point of view, that definitely seems like what we're living through. You look at that as a whole, you look at that from a bird's eye view, and if that's really what's happening, is it the worst thing? No, probably not. Not for everyone. It definitely will be for some people. Everything is the worst thing for someone, but it doesn't mean that the whole world isn't getting a little bit better, a little bit at a time. And so, I wanted to talk about whether or not this view of the empire kind of defies my postmillennial beliefs, and it doesn't. I think it's right in line with them. I think, Jesus said that he will remain at the Father's right hand until every enemy is conquered and made a footstool for him. And I don't think I'm being brave by saying that the American government is an enemy of Christ. They shut down churches. They fund abortion, they fund wars. I think it's pretty clear that they've got a pretty anti-Christian agenda, anti-Christ agenda. So, and I don't want to sound like a dispensationalist there. I'm not talking about the Antichrist that a lot of left behind folks like to talk about. I don't think that's happening, but I think it's by definition an anti-Christ agenda that our government has. So, that it's either going to change or it's going to be overthrown. There's really no two ways about it. Any organization or government or empire or whatever that is opposed to Christ in that way is going to fall or be changed. And so I think, we very well could be on the cusp of one of those two things in the next 10 years. If for no other reason, is there any reason to be optimistic? I mean, do you guys know what happened? Colin Powell is dead. I mean, is that not the greatest thing? I mean, let's drink to that. If you've got a drink at home, lift it up. Colin Powell's dead. He lied us into a war and is responsible for maybe 1 million people dying. So I think that's a reason to drink. I think that's a reason to be happy. I'm obviously kidding a little bit. It's always a tragedy when anyone dies, but, I don't think people really miss Hitler all that much. I think it's totally okay to make fun of Hitler. So I did have some really good zingers, some memes about Colin Powell that I don't think few people appreciated, but I got to chuckle. And if you can't chuckle in this world, if you can't laugh at the fall of the empire, then you're living in the wrong fall of the empire, in my opinion. So ultimately, I'd just like to wrap up with saying that, we can have hope because we don't know what's going to happen. If there's anything to this fourth turning, Yahoo nonsense I'm reading about, then something's going to change. But that doesn't mean it's bad, and that doesn't mean it's going to be the worst thing ever for us. And it doesn't mean, the whole country's going to fall apart, whatever. I kind of like to think that we'll be like Rome someday where, we're not the number one power in the world anymore, but we still exist. We're still making it all right. Wouldn't it be great to live in the America that's not the world's superpower anymore? Imagine that. So yeah, God is sovereign, and a criminal antichrist empire collapsing is not the worst thing that's ever happened to us. Guys, I'm so excited to be back talking to you, talking aggressively at you. To the three of you that listen still, I'm super stoked, and I'm talking to some really cool people about interviews and getting on the show. It is going to be a much different show. Obviously, if today is any example, it's a very similar show where I talk about, Colin Powell being dead, and I drink beer and I talk about the empire falling. That's very similar, but I'm, going to be interviewing some cool people. Doing a lot more like, just getting to know people instead of like things that we want to talk about. Like a lot of the time I'll have a topic when I have someone on, and it's going to be less of that and more just getting to know people. And, we'll be talking about music and politics and theology still, and tornadoes maybe, and and just anything that I'm interested in that I think you should be interested in. That's what we're going to talk about on Everything Else with Nick Stewart. And since I said the name of the show, I think that's a pretty good exit for now. So I will talk to you guys next week. Thank you very much for listening to my first episode back. I love and appreciate you all. Have a great day or night in your local region. Goodbye.